Hi guys, I hope you're well. Thank you so much for coming along to watch my very first crime video. I just wanted to preface this video before you get into it that the comments that I make are purely my opinion and part of my learning along my criminology journey. I'd also like to give a credit to Real Stories for the clips that I've used within this video. The editing isn't great, so I do apologise. I'm not the best at editing, but hopefully I'll get better as I go along. Yeah, and thank you for taking the time. And do remember to like, comment, subscribe, be kind, and have a great day. Hi all, my name is Saf. I am a criminology student and I'm going to be looking at some true crime in the UK and some infamous criminals. Let's see what they're about, what their stories are, and of course, let's not forget the victims in all of the crimes. Here's our first one. I'm sure all of you have heard of this first guy.
The thud of a mechanical digger disturbs the silence of a graveyard.
I'm very conscious of coming across real evil. There's real evil here.
In the dead of night, police exhume a body.
It's a hard thing to go through, having a loved one dug up.
This is the moment the murderous activities of Britain's biggest serial killer were unearthed.
That son of a gun killed my father on Christmas Eve.
In the coming weeks, the hush of night was to be repeatedly broken by exhumation after exhumation.
We used to joke about it because we used to say, she's always down there, and I bet he's got fed up with her and bumped her off. And now...
Over the coming months, detectives were to investigate the deaths of nearly 150 patients of Dr. Fred Shipman.
So who was Harold Shipman? He was born in 1946 on the 14th of January to Mum Vera. Shipman was born into a normal family. You can say quite an ordinary childhood. Nothing in particular stands out for his growing up. He was just a normal kid, went to school. He ended up going to grammar school actually, where he'd gone from top student in a normal school to a kind of ordinary one in the grammar school with the grades so much higher. But he kind of led his life as just ordinary, compliant. Yeah, just nothing jumped out that he was any different from you or me. As you all are aware, no doubt, Shipman is believed to have killed over 215 of his patients, all via injection of morphine or diamorphine, more commonly known as heroin. Shipman, he falsified medical records after the death of his elderly patients, which led him to get away with it for so long, basically. It wasn't until a GP questioned the amount of death certificates that were coming through his practice, but even then, the investigation failed. An undertaker also noted the amount of cremations that were coming through via Harold Shipman's patients, and it all kind of just went under the rug, really. It was just swept under the rug. Back in the 70s, Harold Shipman had a drug addiction of pethidine, and he was convicted of stealing pethidine by falsifying paperwork. However, this wasn't brought up when he was first investigated. Let's go back. The very first instance of Shipman, we believe that he killed a 4-year-old girl. This 4-year-old girl was dying in hospital with her mother by her side. Shipman was present. The mother left the room to go and get a cup of tea, and she said to Shipman, "Look after my girl." And by the time the mum returned, her girl had died. But again, this just went unnoticed, and Shipman kind of got a taste for getting away with murder at this point. The question is, what made him this way? Like I said earlier, Shipman's childhood was pretty normal. He went to the grammar school. He didn't really mix with local kids. more so I think because of his mum. His mum thought he was the special one. He had more intellect than his siblings, and encouraged him greatly to focus on his studies and become something. At this point, there was no inclination of Shipman wanting to be a doctor. There was just no inclination. At 17, Shipman lost his mum to lung cancer. He was by her side when she passed away. The GP used to come round very often and administer morphine to his mum to make her comfortable. And Shipman may have been quite fascinated by this. Now, on the night that Shipman's mum Vera died, he decided to go for a run. He put his kit on in the pouring rain and he ran for miles and miles and miles. It's argued that exercise, it gives us endorphins that can be thousands of times stronger than heroin, and it's wondered whether Shipman needed that release. I think after caring for his mum for so long, her death was a relief, and that she was in better hands, and he could relax a little bit. So was this the start of Shipman's killings? Was this where he decided that he wanted to be the one who played God? Who knows? Med school comes around and Shipman fails first time for his exam. So he resat and he passed the following year. And then in 1965, he was accepted into Leeds Medical School, where he began his career as a doctor, and as a junior doctor. By 1974, Shipman was a father of two, and he went into practice where he was very much liked by his patients. He was just a really nice guy, and he put a lot of effort into making his patients feel safe and welcome. The staff, however, had a little bit of a different view of him, because Shipman never let them do anything for him, not even take blood, give injections. He wanted to do it all himself. He never delegated a single thing. There was slight concern at this practice where on one day Shipman lost 3 patients, but again it just kind of went under the rug. But following this was when his addiction to pethidine came about, and he was discovered forging the paperwork for pethidine for his own use, of which he was convicted, by the way, and got a fine, a £600 fine, which is crazy. He wasn't removed from practice, he wasn't stopped from practicing, nothing, just a £600 fine. The practice he was in at the time, however, did get him to leave, so he was no longer welcome there. But yes, his punishment was nothing, just a 600 quid fine. Carry on being a doctor. Once he'd left this practice, Shipman felt really angry at these people, that how dare they stop him from practicing as a doctor? How dare they remove him from the surgery? He had a real chip on his shoulder about it. And this was part of his kind of God complex, and looking at people like they were inferior. Anyway, he took himself to rehab, got himself straight, and then he found an advertisement for a surgery in Hyde that were looking for a practice partner. So he applied for it, and he was really honest with his past. He opened up and said, look, I want to carry on caring for people. The pethidine was just a coping mechanism at the time, and made his excuses, and Hyde took him in as their local GP. So now he's in Hyde. So this is where it all kind of falls apart eventually. But initially, when Harold Shipman started in Hyde practicing as a GP, he was really liked again, and he re-established that really good patient-doctor relationship with all of his patients. And he was very much liked, and he'd pop in to see his elderly patients and make that real effort. And And he liked that. He loved that because that gave him that power of them needing him around. They needed him around. So this is where the question started with the amount of deaths, and it was examined in the Shipman inquiry that the amount of deaths in the elderly were substantially higher at Shipman surgery compared to the other ones.
Because of the nature of the Shipman case, it may never be possible to document the exact number of murders he committed. The number and patterns of deaths in Dr. Shipman's practice was examined. When it was compared with those of other practitioners, significant differences appeared, notably that the rate of deaths of elderly patients was disproportionately high.
But at the time, he was getting away with falsifying records, changing records, but it did eventually all fall apart in 1998, where he decided to forge the will of Kathleen Grundy.
This inquiry would also reveal Shipman's modus operandi. He would often kill his victims, most of whom were elderly, with an injection of morphine, and then return to his office to falsify their medical records on his computer to exaggerate their poor health. In the case of Kathleen Grundy, he had backdated several entries to suggest she had become addicted to morphine.
The thought of an 80-odd-year-old former Lady Mayoress of the town of Hyde scoring bags of heroin in the back streets of Manchester seems to me ludicrous and ridiculous.
Kathleen Grundy passed away, and the daughter, who was actually a solicitor, found this will that she had no idea about. So she held Kathleen's original will for over a decade, and this typewriter made will was there, and signed by Kathleen supposedly, and it gave everything, all of her estate, which was in excess of £300,000, to Shipman. So the daughter questioned it, and in the inquiry it arose that the typewriter that Shipman used, that was used for the will, was Shipman's, and he said he'd never seen that will, although his fingerprint was found on it. This is when the inquiry really kicks in. So the police, they start looking into Shipman. What's going on? What's happening? They looked into the will. The will was witnessed by two people, which the daughter actually tracked down. She drove to Hyde and tracked these people down. And it transpires that these two people were just patients sitting in the waiting room at a doctor's surgery when Shipman called them into his room together and asked them to sign a bit of paperwork they just needed to witness, and Kathleen Grundy was in the room. One of those people who signed as a witness said that the actual paperwork was covered up, so he didn't actually know what he was signing. And I don't know why it wasn't questioned, but he didn't know what he was signing, but it was in fact the will of Kathleen Grundy. Kathleen herself didn't know she was signing a will or was involved in any way of a new will. She believed she was signing to a patient survey that Shipman had fed her in this story. Sorry, I needed a drink. So let's get back to it. Where were we? Okay, so they found the will. Shipman has been convicted at this point of 15 murders and 1 forgery.
Often in the medical notes, which he'd made up, suggesting that these people had had heart conditions, for example, when they hadn't really, and then saying, well, they must have had a heart attack. Of course, somebody having a heart attack doesn't just simply fall asleep sitting in a chair looking very relaxed. Life just isn't like that.
Police investigated Shipman's book of death certificates. They made a list of 15 deaths that they decided should be investigated as a priority. Of the victims on this list, 9 had been buried and 6 cremated. More exhumations were ordered.
They had to exhume bodies. However, this is why the convictions were so small compared to the actual death rate of Harold Shipman, because Harold Shipman persuaded a lot of people to get their loved ones cremated. Shipman made 2 mistakes. The first mistake was the typewriter. Did he know that that was going to get found out, or was he just being brazen, thinking that he got away with so many that he could get away with this as well? His second mistake was using morphine and diamorphine that stays in the body. So the ones that were buried, God rest their souls, they were exhumed and they still had morphine or diamorphine in their systems. As a doctor, surely he would have known this. But again, was it a confidence thing? Was it that he thought, well, I've got away with so many, no one's questioned me up till now? Or was it that, oh, let's just test the boundaries, let's see if I get caught? Or did he want to get caught? Did he know that he would keep on killing if he was allowed to? These questions remain unanswered. Fast forward 2004. Shipman was checked on at 5 a.m. in the morning on the 13th of January, and he was fine. Shipman knew that after that 5 a.m. check, he had an hour before he would be checked again. So what does Shipman do? In that time, he took his own life. With his life, he took all the answers that all these families so desperately need. He hung himself knowing that it takes 4 minutes. So by the time the prison officers would come back round at HMP Wakefield, his job was done. So from that day, all of these answers that people have needed they're just never going to get it. They're never going to get it.
But for Harold Frederick Shipman, it came in the early hours of the morning at Wakefield Prison on Tuesday the 13th of January 2004. Prisoner CJ 8199, the expert in death, had timed his final act well. He was beyond saving. He had been alive at 5 a.m. when the last check was made on him, and he knew the next check was not for another hour.
Now I look at Shipman and think, was he born evil? Or was it the environment? Was it the experiences that he had that made this murderous serial killer? And it's really hard to tell. Although I do believe it may be a mixture of various factors. And I think the biggest one was his mum dying, and watching the GP at the time. I do believe that that was kind of like a big turning point for him, losing a very important person in his life, but watching the piece with the morphine. And that kind of put him on a path to want like a God complex. He wanted to play God, and he wanted to decide when people needed to die and be at peace. I just don't see anything else that would kind of jump out. But this is the thing with serial killers, nothing really does tend to jump out. They fit into society so well. They function very well in communities, and they're never extraordinary in anything really. They very non-combative. They're just part of everyday life. And if you talk to people or listen to people that knew serial killers before they were found out as serial killers, most of them say, I would have never believed that they would have done that. And that was the case with Harold Shipman. Harold Shipman was a pillar of the community. He was seen as a pillar of the community. He was seen as a good GP. Yet he had done so many bad crimes, and then took all of his answers to the grave with him in a very selfish way. So, where does all this fit in with my criminology? My criminology is, and my studies are based on what causes crime, and the justice system and the theories behind it all, and a lot of sociology. I've always been really interested in high profile crime, in particular serial killers, and their stories, and the stories of their victims. And I think that's important to remember the victims, because they play such a big role in the why behind these killers. Most of them are vulnerable. Most of them almost will go unnoticed as they die. Um, in general, don't get me wrong, there's lots of cases where people do go noticed, but like in Shipman's case, they're elderly patients, so kind of half expected that they're going to pass away and no one will question it. So very interesting people, and I wanted to start my YouTube videos um, with a big case, and this helps me process some stuff, and I can learn along the way as well. So thank you for watching, and let's get into another video very soon. Take care.